Workers, comrades, sisters and brothers, ask yourselves a single, dangerous question: who pays for the dreams you are told to chase? From the moment you open your eyes each morning, society whispers to you that success is an individual pursuit, that wealth is a personal virtue, that freedom is bought rather than built. But beneath every slogan, every advertisement, every promise of prosperity, there lies a truth more brutal than any illusion. Capitalism can manufacture. The dreams you are sold are paid for with your labor, your time, your dignity, and your future. For what is the modern world, if not a vast marketplace where human lives are measured not by their potential but by their profitability, where the value of a person is determined by the price they can command for someone else's gain? The ruling class does not merely accumulate wealth, it accumulates control of your hours, your effort, your imagination, and it does so precisely by convincing you that the system exploiting you is the only one possible. But history, as I have tirelessly argued, is nothing but the struggle of classes, an unbroken chain of conflict between those who own and those who produce, and today's world is no exception. The capitalist promises you freedom but binds you to wages. It promises opportunity but delivers exhaustion. It promises dreams but demands that you surrender your life to make those dreams profitable for someone above you. They tell you to dream big so long as your dreams never threaten the order that exploits you. Look around. The wealth of cities, the brilliance of technology, the abundance of global production, none of it emerges from the minds of those who sit in boardrooms counting profits. It arises from the hands, the backs, the minds of workers whose name history does not record, but whose labor makes history possible. The skyscrapers stand because workers raised them. The digital world thrives because workers coded it. The markets buzz because workers feed them. And yet, the very people who create everything are denied everything. This is the hidden cost of the dreams you are sold. You are taught to admire the wealth that was taken from you. You are taught to compete against your own class. You are taught to blame yourself for conditions engineered to keep you powerless. Capitalism thrives by turning collective struggles into personal failures. It isolates you, so you never recognize your true strength, your unity. For when workers believe they are alone, they submit. But when workers understand they are a class, they rise, and rise you must. Because the ruling class fears only one thing, not your ambition, not your individuality, not your hope for a better life. They fear your organization. They fear your solidarity. They fear the day you recognize that the wealth of the world is produced not by them but by you. They fear the moment you stop dreaming the dreams they sell and begin demanding the world you deserve. Capitalism speaks of freedom, but it binds humanity to endless toil. It speaks of progress, but its progress is built on exploitation. It speaks of choice, but offers only the choice of which master you will serve. Yet history teaches us that no system founded on inequality can endure forever. The contradictions sharpen, the injustices accumulate, and the people sooner or later awaken. Comrades, the time of awakening is now. The struggle of our age is not merely economic, it is existential. It is the struggle to reclaim the very capacity to imagine a world beyond exploitation. The struggle to assert that labor is not a commodity, that humanity cannot be reduced to profit margins, that society must serve those who build it, not those who own it. Organize, unite, speak, study, struggle together. The revolution does not begin with violence, it begins with consciousness, with recognizing that the chains you carry were forged to restrain you, not to protect you, with understanding that the power of the few survives only through the obedience of the many, with realizing that every gain the working class has ever won, every right, every freedom, every improvement was carved from the hands of those who refused to accept the world as it was. You are the heirs of that struggle. You are the force that history waits for. You are the makers of tomorrow. So reject the dreams sold to you. Create your own. Dream not of escaping the system, but of transforming it. Dream not as isolated individuals, but as a united class. Dream not of becoming the rulers of others, but of abolishing the conditions that require rulers at all. For the true dream of humanity, the dream worth fighting for, worth organizing for, worth living for, is not the dream sold to you by the powerful, but the dream, built collectively by the oppressed, a world where no one's labor is stolen, no one's dignity is traded, and no one's future is bought and sold for profit. That dream is not a fantasy. It is a possibility waiting for the courage of the working class to make it real. Rise, comrades, history is already listening. The dreams sold under capitalism are built on the exploitation of workers because every promise of success in this system rests on a foundation of labor that is undervalued, underpaid, and systematically obscured. From the advertisements that glamorize luxury to the narratives that glorify wealth as the ultimate achievement, capitalism constructs an entire ideology around aspiration, while concealing the social relations that make those aspirations possible. When a society tells you that anyone can rise to the top through hard work, it simultaneously hides the fact that the wealth at the top accumulates only because millions at the bottom are compelled to work harder than ever just to survive. The glossy dream of upward mobility is not simply a story, it is a mechanism of control, keeping workers striving for an illusion rather than questioning the structure that defines their lives. Every commodity, every building, every service, every convenience that capitalism celebrates as evidence of progress is the result of human labor. Yet the people whose effort brings these things into existence rarely benefit from the value they produce. Instead, they see wages that barely meet their needs, working conditions that exhaust their bodies, and hours that leave them no time for rest or fulfillment. The very dreams they are told to pursue, a home, stability, status, comfort, are made unattainable, because the system requires their continuous exploitation to sustain itself. The more they labor to reach these dreams, the more those dreams recede, like a horizon that moves farther away with every step forward. Capitalism promotes the idea that dreams are personal achievements, disconnected from the economic structure that shapes them. But in reality, those dreams function as tools for maintaining the existing order. By encouraging individuals to focus on their own personal advancement, the system fragments collective identity and diverts attention from the conditions that keep workers subordinate. The worker who blames themselves for not achieving the marketed ideal is less likely to question why the ideal is inaccessible to the majority in the first place. Thus, the dream becomes a weapon turned against those who chase it, reinforcing the belief that failure is personal, not systemic. Behind the dream is the relentless drive for profit, and profit can only be generated when the cost of labor is less than the value labor produces. This is the core of exploitation. Workers generate wealth through their activity, but that wealth is appropriated by those who control the means of production. The dream of prosperity conceals this extraction, making it appear natural that a small minority accumulates vast fortunes, while the majority struggles to maintain a decent life. What capitalism celebrates as entrepreneurial success is, in truth, the organized extraction of surplus value from millions whose work makes such success possible. The dream of consumer freedom operates similarly. People are told that happiness lies in the ability to buy, to own, to display. The market offers endless products, claiming that identity and satisfaction can be purchased. Yet the ability to consume is limited by wages deliberately kept low to maximize profit. Workers are encouraged to desire what they can barely afford, keeping them locked in cycles of labor, debt, and dependence. The dream becomes both the carrot and the chain, pulling people forward while holding them in place. Even education, career pathways, and professional aspirations are shaped by this logic. Students are taught to pursue careers not based on their passions or talents, but on the demands of capital. They are told to dream big while being funneled into roles that benefit profitability rather than human flourishing. Their future becomes a commodity traded in the market, their labor pre-purchased before their lives even begin. The dream of success becomes indistinguishable from the dream of becoming a more efficient instrument of capital accumulation. In this way, the dreams promoted by capitalism are not neutral visions of fulfillment, but ideological constructs designed to maintain economic hierarchy. They glorify the possibility of climbing while hiding the mechanisms that keep most people at the bottom. They transform systemic inequalities into personal challenges. They turn exploitation into ambition and alienation into motivation. Workers chase dreams that require their own continued subordination, contributing to the wealth and power of those who profit from their efforts. Thus, the dream is not simply a deception, It is a structure of control. It convinces workers that their role in the system is temporary, that exploited labor is merely a phase on the way to success, that if they endure long enough, they will eventually join those who exploit rather than those who are exploited. This belief keeps them compliant, hopeful, and divided. Yet the reality remains unchanged. The dreams sold under capitalism depend on the existence of a vast working class whose labor is systematically undervalued, whose potential is constrained, and whose lives are shaped by forces beyond their control. True power lies not in individual ambition, but in collective class unity, because no single person, no matter how talented, disciplined, or determined, can overcome the structural forces that shape society. Capitalism conditions us to believe that success or failure is a personal matter, that one rises by virtue of effort and falls by virtue of inadequacy. This myth isolates individuals, turning their attention inward and convincing them that they must compete against everyone else for survival. But the real levers of power are not held by individuals acting alone, they are held by classes acting in concert, by masses who recognize their shared conditions and decide to act together. Individual ambition may bring temporary victories, but only collective unity can alter the foundations upon which society rests. Under capitalism, the working class is fragmented intentionally. Workers are divided by job titles, industries, wages, identities, and national borders, so that they never see themselves as part of a single social force. The system thrives on this fragmentation because an isolated worker is powerless. When workers view each other as competitors, they accept lower wages, harsher conditions, and deeper exploitation. They internalize the belief that their advancement requires another's decline, that scarcity is natural, that solidarity is impractical. Yet this is the greatest lie capitalism produces. Scarcity is manufactured, competition is imposed, and fragmentation is a deliberate strategy to keep workers from realizing their collective strength. Individual ambition, as defined under capitalism, is harnessed by the ruling class. The worker who strives alone is encouraged to dream of personal victory, but this dream is constructed within boundaries that preserve the system. The ambition of one worker to rise above others does nothing to challenge exploitation. It merely reinforces the idea that success is a privilege reserved for the few. But even when a worker does manage to ascend into a better job, a higher salary, a marginally improved life, they do so within an order that remains unchanged. Their ascent does not liberate the many, it only obscures the conditions of the majority by holding up a rare exception as a universal possibility. This illusion weakens collective action and strengthens the very hierarchy that exploits them. True power emerges only when workers recognize that they are not isolated individuals, but members of a single class whose interests are fundamentally aligned. When workers understand that their struggles are shared, that their suffering is not accidental but systemic, that their conditions are not personal failures but coordinated outcomes of exploitation, they begin to transform consciousness into solidarity. Unity is not merely the act of standing together, it is the recognition of a shared destiny shaped by shared oppression. It is the realization that one worker's liberation depends on the liberation of all workers, and that the only real enemy is the class that profits from the division. The ruling class has always feared this unity. Throughout history, every significant shift in power has come not from isolated heroes but from masses who refuse to obey, refuse to remain silent, refuse to accept their assigned place. Workers who act alone can be fired, replaced, silenced. Workers who act together become a force capable of halting production, disrupting profit, and challenging the authority of those who claim ownership over society's wealth. A single worker may be dismissed, but a unified class can bring entire industries to their knees. A lone voice may be ignored, but a collective demand echoes through the structures of power with a force that cannot be denied. Collective unity transforms fear into courage. It replaces competition with cooperation, hopelessness with purpose, and isolation with strength. It allows workers to reclaim the sense agency that capitalism strips from them. When they unite, they begin to understand that the wealth they produce belongs to them, that the structures that govern them are neither natural nor eternal, and that oppression persists only as long as the oppressed remain divided. Unity gives them the vision to imagine a different society and the means to build it. Individual ambition is fragile in the face of systemic power. It can be crushed, co-opted, or redirected. But collective unity is resilient. It regenerates, adapts, and expands because it draws its strength not from isolated will but from shared experience. It turns millions of small struggles into a single movement capable of reshaping the world. It exposes the truth that workers united are the majority and that every institution of power rests on their labor, their obedience, and their consent. Thus, the path to genuine transformation does not lie in the ascent of a few, but in the awakening of the many. When workers act as a class rather than as scattered individuals, they discover their true power, the power to challenge exploitation, to dismantle oppressive structures, to claim the wealth they create, and to reshape society in the image of justice rather than profit. Capitalism survives by disguising inequality as natural and unavoidable because its stability depends on convincing people that the hierarchies they live under are not constructed but inherent to human existence. From childhood, individuals are immersed in narratives that portray wealth as the result of talent and poverty as the consequence of laziness. These stories are repeated in schools, media, workplaces, and political discourse until they become common sense. The system works tirelessly to present its outcomes, massive wealth for a few and perpetual struggle for many, as the inevitable product of human nature, rather than the deliberate outcome of economic structures designed to benefit a minority. By naturalizing inequality, capitalism ensures that people do not question it, but instead internalize it as the only possible arrangement of society. In every era of capitalism, inequality has not merely existed, it has been rationalized. The rich are portrayed as brilliant innovators, as risk-taking geniuses who earn their fortunes through exceptional ability. Meanwhile, the working class is told that their position is simply the result of limited ambition, insufficient skill, or personal failure. This narrative erases the reality that wealth accumulates because value is extracted from the labor of millions, not because a handful of individuals possess superhuman qualities. It hides the fact that opportunity is unevenly distributed from the beginning, that the children of the wealthy inherit advantages that cannot be replicated through effort alone, and that the marketplace is structured to keep most people in the same position they were born into. By framing inequality as a reflection of natural differences, capitalism conceals its own mechanisms of exploitation. The system also disguises inequality by presenting competition as an essential element of human life. It tells people that conflict over resources is inevitable, that scarcity is inherent, and that only the strongest survive. This narrative is not based on historical truth. Human societies have depended on cooperation for far longer than they have been organized around competition. But capitalism requires individuals to see each other as rivals rather than allies, because competition weakens solidarity. When workers believe they must fight one another for limited opportunities, they do not unite to challenge the structures that create their deprivation. By portraying competition as a natural law, capitalism prevents the working class from recognizing that their real struggle is not against one another, but against the system that forces them into perpetual conflict. Inequality is further disguised through the myth of mobility. People are told that with enough determination they can rise to the top, that anyone can become wealthy, that the system offers limitless opportunities. While a few individuals may succeed, capitalism uses these rare cases as proof that success is available to all. This illusion obscures the statistical reality that upward mobility is extremely limited, and that most who start in the working class remain there for life. The exceptional individual becomes a symbol used to justify the suffering of the majority, reinforcing the idea that if they have not advanced, it is due to personal shortcomings rather than structural barriers. This myth of mobility keeps the working class hopeful, compliant, and less likely to resist the system that exploits them. Capitalism also relies on ideology to disguise inequality. Media outlets owned by wealthy interests present the world through a lens that protects the ruling class. They minimize discussions of exploitation while glorifying celebrity culture, entrepreneurial success, and consumer lifestyles that most people cannot attain. They amplify the belief that the poor are irresponsible, that public assistance is indulgent, and that redistribution is unfair. In doing so, they invert reality. The class that hoards wealth is portrayed as hardworking, while the class that produces wealth is depicted as undeserving. Through this ideological manipulation, capitalism makes inequality appear not only natural but morally justified. The political system reinforces this illusion by offering choices that never challenge the underlying economic structure. Elections become competitions between parties that differ in rhetoric but share an allegiance to capitalist interests. Policies that could meaningfully reduce inequality, strong labor protections, wealth redistribution, public ownership are dismissed as impossible, extremist, or dangerous. Meanwhile, reforms that leave the core of the system intact are presented as the only realistic option. By narrowing the spectrum of what is politically imaginable, capitalism ensures that inequality remains unchallenged. People are encouraged to believe that the current system is the best humanity can achieve and that any alternative would lead to chaos or collapse. Education also plays a key role in naturalizing inequality. Schools teach obedience, competition, and acceptance of authority far more effectively than they teach critical thinking or collective struggle. Students learn to internalize hierarchy through grading systems, tracking, and the glorification of individual achievement. They are rarely taught to analyze capitalism, labor relations, or class struggle. Instead, they are prepared to enter the workforce as disciplined participants in an unequal economy. By shaping consciousness from a young age, capitalism ensures that people grow up believing that inequality is part of the natural order. Thus, capitalism survives not because it provides justice or equality, but because it persuades people that the injustices they experience are unavoidable facts of life. It convinces them that hierarchy is natural, that competition is biological, that wealth reflects virtue, and that poverty reflects failure. Through these myths, capitalism maintains its power and ensures that the majority remain bound to a system that exploits them, while believing there is no alternative. Workers create all wealth, yet receive the least from it, because every product, every service, every structure of value within society is generated by the labor of millions whose efforts form the foundation of the entire economic order. Yet these same people are systematically denied the fruits of their work. The entire machinery of capitalism depends on this contradiction, the immense productivity of the working class, and the minimal compensation it receives in return. Without this imbalance, the capitalist system could not function, for profit itself is nothing more than the unpaid portion of workers' labor collected by those who own but do not produce. The wealth of the ruling class accumulates only because the working class generates far more value than it is permitted to keep. The process begins with the simple fact that labor is the only source of new value. Machines cannot create value by themselves. They transfer the value already embedded in them. Capital cannot multiply without the intervention of human hands and minds. The capitalist understands this, even if workers are taught to believe otherwise. Employers purchase labor power at the lowest cost they can manage, knowing that the worker will produce more value during the workday than they are paid in wages. This difference, the surplus, becomes profit, a surplus extracted from the worker's efforts. It is not the brilliance of the owner, nor the efficiency of the market, but the exploitation of labor that creates wealth. Yet this exploitation is hidden beneath layers of ideology designed to normalize the imbalance. The worker spends their life generating wealth for others while their own needs remain secondary. The wages they earn are calibrated not to reward their full contribution, but merely to sustain their ability to continue working. They are paid enough to return tomorrow, not enough to prosper. The gap between the value they produce and the compensation they receive widens constantly as productivity rises but wages stagnate. Every technological advancement that increases output should, in theory, improve the lives of those who operate the machines. Instead, these innovations serve to increase profits for owners while intensifying the pace and pressure on workers. The wealth produced through such advancements flows upward while the Workers who make them possible face job insecurity, wage suppression, and the ever-present threat of being replaced. Meanwhile, the ruling class reaps the benefits of labor without contribution. They accumulate wealth through ownership, not work. Their fortunes expand, a function of control over the means of production, not because they stand on factory floors or perform essential services. They sit in boardrooms making decisions about labor they never perform, about markets they do not experience, about communities they do not live in. They enjoy the comfort, security, and luxury that only the collective labor of millions can create. Yet they have convinced society that they alone are responsible for economic growth. The worker is told they are lucky to have a job, while the owner's dependence on labor is concealed. The system reinforces itself by shaping consciousness. Workers are encouraged to believe that their low wages reflect low skill, that they must climb the economic ladder to deserve comfort, that the wealth of the elite is the result of superior intelligence or initiative. This narrative obscures reality. The poorest workers often labor the hardest, while the wealthiest often do the least. The capitalist class depends on maintaining this illusion, because once workers understand that their labor creates all wealth, they begin to question why they receive so little of it and why a small minority controls what the majority produces. This contradiction is not accidental, it is structural. Capitalism cannot compensate workers fully for the value they create because profit itself requires that they be paid less than their labor is worth. If workers received the full value of their contribution, the capitalist would have nothing left to accumulate. Thus, the inequality between those who produce and those who profit is not a flaw in the system, but its foundation. Every expansion of capital deepens this imbalance, and every crisis of capitalism is resolved by pushing the burden onto workers through wage cuts, unemployment, and austerity. The workers create the wealth that stabilizes society, and then they are asked to sacrifice when the system fails. Even within this unjust arrangement, workers continue to show extraordinary creativity, dedication, and resilience. They innovate, problem-solve, build, produce, and sustain the world's infrastructure. Yet they remain invisible in the narratives constructed by the wealthy. Their contributions are taken for granted, their needs sidelined, their rights suppressed. Without them, society would collapse instantly, but with them, the ruling class continues to expand its fortunes. The truth remains clear. All wealth flows from labor, yet the workers who generate it are denied its benefit. Until this fundamental imbalance is challenged, until workers recognize their collective power and demand control over the conditions of their labor, the cycle of exploitation will continue unbroken. Only when workers reclaim the value they produce can society move toward justice, equality, and genuine human freedom. Revolution begins with class consciousness and organization, because no structural transformation can occur until the oppressed recognize both the source of their suffering and the power they collectively possess. The working class, dispersed across countless industries, regions, and roles, experiences exploitation in different forms, yet these experiences share a common root: the domination of capital over labor. As long as workers interpret their struggles as isolated personal misfortunes, the system remains secure. But when they begin to understand their condition as part of a broader historical and economic pattern, they awaken to the reality that their hardships are not individual failures, but collective symptoms of a system designed to benefit a minority at the expense of the majority. This awakening class consciousness is the first breach in the ideological armor of capitalism. Class consciousness means recognizing that society is divided into classes with opposing interests, those who own and those who produce. It is the moment when a worker sees that their employer's profit is not a reward for innovation, but the direct outcome of their own unpaid labor. It is the realization that the struggle for higher wages, fair treatment, and humane conditions is not merely a workplace dispute, but part of a broader fight against a structure that thrives on exploitation. Without this awareness, workers may resist individual injustices, but fail to challenge the system that creates them. They may blame themselves or blame each other, falling into the traps of competition and division that capitalism depends on. But with consciousness comes clarity. The enemy is not the worker beside you, but the system above you. Yet awareness alone is not enough. History shows that oppressed groups can understand their exploitation for decades without altering their material conditions. For consciousness to become transformative, it must lead to organization. Organization is the means by which scattered individuals become a unified force. It builds the infrastructure of struggle, turning sentiment into power, anger into strategy, and possibility into action. Through organization, workers learn to coordinate their demands, protect their interests, and apply pressure where the system is most vulnerable. No ruling class has ever surrendered its power voluntarily. It must be confronted by a disciplined and united movement capable of challenging its control of the economic and political institutions that shape society. Organization also protects workers from the isolating tendencies of capitalism. Alone, a worker risks their job, livelihood, and safety when they attempt to resist exploitation. United, workers multiply their power and shield one another from retaliation. A single worker refusing unjust conditions can be dismissed. Thousands can shut down production entirely. This collective strength is what the ruling class fears most, which is why it invests enormous resources in suppressing unions, fragmenting communities, and promoting ideologies that discourage solidarity. The rulers understand that organization transforms the working class from a dispersed labor force into an active agent of history. Class consciousness deepens through collective struggle. When workers fight together, whether for wages, rights, or dignity, they discover not only shared grievances but shared potential. They learn that their power does not come from appealing to the goodwill of the powerful, but from their indispensable role in producing society's wealth. They begin to grasp that the factories, fields, transportation networks, and technology that sustain civilization would cease to function without their labor. This recognition shifts their understanding of themselves from passive participants in the system to active creators of the world. Through struggle, workers reclaim their identity as a class, with the capacity to reshape society. Organization also provides the structure necessary to develop political consciousness. Workers come to see that exploitation is not limited to the workplace, but embedded in laws, institutions, and policies shaped by the interests of the ruling class. They understand that economic power translates into political power and that any meaningful change must confront both. As class consciousness expands, the demand for transformative action grows. Workers begin to recognize that reforms, while valuable, are insufficient to end exploitation. They start to envision a society in which the means of production are controlled democratically, where wealth is distributed according to need, and where labor serves human development rather than profit. Revolution emerges from this synthesis of consciousness and organization. It is not an eruptive moment of chaos, but the culmination of years of awakening, education, solidarity, and coordinated struggle. It becomes possible when the ruling class can no longer govern in the old way, and the working class refuses to live in the old way. Revolution is the point at which the oppressed not only understand their condition, but move collectively to overturn it. It is the moment when workers recognize that they are the majority, that their labor sustains society, and that they have the right and the ability to reclaim control over the world they create. Thus, the seed of revolution lies not in spontaneous outrage, but in the deliberate cultivation of consciousness and organization. When workers understand their class position and unite around their shared interests, they unlock a power far greater than any individual ambition could achieve. They become capable of challenging the foundations of capitalism itself, asserting their role as the true authors of history and building a society that serves the many rather than the few. In the end, every illusion this system feeds you, every dream packaged as personal triumph, every story of merit, every myth of mobility crumbles when seen through the lens of class struggle. The truth is simple and unchanging. Workers create the world, yet the world is owned by those who do not labor. The ruling class survives by masking exploitation as opportunity, inequality as nature, competition as destiny, and isolation as freedom. But once these myths lose their power, once workers recognize their shared condition and their shared strength, the balance of history shifts. What appears unchangeable becomes fragile. What seems eternal becomes temporary. The moment the working class awakens to its collective identity, the chains that bind it begin to break. The moment it organizes, it becomes a force capable of shaping a new social order. The future does not belong to the minority who hoard wealth, it belongs to the majority who create it, and it is only a matter of consciousness, unity, and courage before they reclaim what has always been theirs.